Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. I'm Sabrina Verhoef, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jane Liu. We are riding solo today, Jane and I. So for those of you that recall episode 13, season 2, we had the wonderful Shaliza on, and she talked about career enmeshment and how the experience of a job loss and really how to separate yourself, your career from your identity. And from feedback that we got from many of you, this topic really resonated with a lot of you. So today we're going to get a little bit more personal because then I got laid off in December. And it's also something that Jane has experienced. So it's layoffs are not a glamorous thing, right? But we both agree that it's just not talked about enough. And so today we really hope to normalize this by sharing our own personal stories with you. I do want to mention though that besides job loss, this episode I think can be or is aimed to really cover more like about loss in general, like loss of purpose, or whether you're feeling lost in life or a loss of a relationship. So while we do center around the job loss, we hope that it will help many of you that are going through some sort of loss. And so yeah, while this episode was inspired specifically by my layoff in last December, again, Jane and I have both experienced this, and today we'll be covering the impact of this loss on like mental health and relationships, identity. So we hope this is going to be helpful. But yeah, let's start with you, Jane. Take us back to since we both experienced a layoff, right? Like
Mhm.
what was the situation like? Were you surprised? Like take us back to that moment.
Yeah. I mean, you're totally right. This is one of those things that is like not glamorous to share. And I feel like a lot of people are nervous or embarrassed to share. And I genuinely do hope that with us being vulnerable and kind of sharing our stories, we hope that more people can, one, feel more comfortable with situations like this if it were to ever happen to you, but also, you know, feel comfortable sharing and then helping others along the way. But yeah, to your question, so I was laid off in 2019. So this is a couple years ago, but I just to kind of roll back a little bit, after college, I've always worked in consulting, and I knew that this wasn't necessarily like a forever job to me. So I do recognize now looking back that that company at that time was also probably going through a lot, and maybe I just joined not knowing a lot of the background and context and complexity that was happening. Um, when I interviewed, I was very clear on what I was looking for, which is I do not want to travel. I want to be local to Chicago. I was very, very clear. I was promised a lot of things during that interview. So I was
Mhm.
promised 0 to very, very little travel, and I ended up signing on with that company, and granted, like, the pay was good, like, it all made sense at the time,
Mhm.
and when I joined, literally the 2nd day, they booked a flight for me, so
Oh,
to travel for work, and maybe that should have been a red flag, honestly, but, at that point, it's like, you signed on, you're starting what are you gonna do?
right.
So, I traveled. Then I got assigned on work or projects where I would literally travel every single week or almost every single week. And frankly, I was just like not in a good place, I think both physically and mentally with that type of schedule. And I would fly home later that week, and that would happen a lot. And the actual layoff moment, honestly, shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was a surprise. I literally showed up to work. I got called into an office and I was laid off, like, verbally, right
Wow.
there, and I was escorted out, and that's it. I left everything. I left my computer, I left they packed everything else for me, everything that was at my desk, and then they sent it to me. That is how I was escorted out of this freaking company. And yeah, there was, like, severance, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well, but, like, there were multiple instances where I actually saw that prior with other people, and I should have known, right? Like, I think at that time, I was
Mm.
kind of living in this, like, fog of maybe I don't wanna accept that that is my reality, maybe I knew in the back of my mind that this could happen to me, but when that happened, I remember at 9 AM, I got called into this meeting, And I cried in this meeting. It was the first time that's ever happened to me. I was crying. I also just bought a house at that time, the house that I live in now. I
Oh.
just bought that house. I did not know if financially I was able to continue owning this home. I didn't know what was going to happen. Um, and it was just like traumatizing thinking about it. And I mean, this is such a good topic to talk about because I think I was lost for like 4 months after that. It took me so long. And even when I got my job at LinkedIn, LinkedIn was the following job that I had.
Mm.
Even at when I got my job at LinkedIn, it took me a very long time to go through the whole imposter syndrome, right? Because in the back of my mind, I still
Mm.
felt really just defeated and like a failure and that I'm not going to fit in this new place because of the experience I had before. How is my manager like? Like I've been so blessed to have had great managers so far, but
Mhm.
like, those things continue to be on my mind. But yeah, we'll talk about all of that. But this is like the first time that I'm like I've publicly shared the detail of the experience, but that's a little
Yeah,
bit about
wow. I
my
mean, thank you for
experience.
even opening up here because you told me this, some of it in like private, but yeah,
Yeah,
I just want to acknowledge that that's a lot. And how I'm like angry for you. This company sounds very toxic, to use a word for that, but
it
wow, the
is.
way that they just treat employees or employees about to be laid off, like that's very shitty.
It's awful. I mean, we'll talk more about it, but
Yeah.
Sabrina, I know
Wow.
yours is obviously a lot more like recent. So this was the end of last year. Tell us
Yeah.
about your situation just so we all have context.
Yeah, well, definitely less toxic than this. But yeah, to summarize, so I mean, some of you know that I joined an industry that is very prone to high risk, right? So I joined the autonomous vehicle industry, so self-driving cars, which was very exciting to me at the time. And I still believe autonomous is the future, and I still will root for my former employer always. Um, but yeah, so I had been there a year and a half. We were really solid. We just got just that August, like last August, we got a massive permit, which was a big milestone for a company, to allow us to drive in California and charge for people in California. So it wasn't just like this very constricted area in San Francisco, but it was in many different locations in California. So, and as you may imagine, the autonomous industry is very highly regulated, and we have to work with a lot of different governors, state-wise and federal-wise. So that moment I will never forget. It was in August, and we were all celebrating. The company was at an all-time high. We were coming up with our expansion plan for the next 10 cities. I was
Mhm.
doing market intelligence for all of these markets that we're going to go after. So we were on an all-time high, and in October last year, 2023, we had a big offsite, people offsites. Our CHRO, she was new, and she invited everyone. It was the first time that our company got together for people org. So about 200 people came together in San Francisco. We ideated, we strategized, we planned for the years ahead. And I just felt so good and so optimistic about our future. I took a cruise ride, and I'm gonna say the company because you guys can figure this out. But anyways, it was very invigorating. It really and energizing, all the emotions. So that was October. And then a week later, we found out that there was an accident in San Francisco where sadly a person got hit by a human driver first, but she landed in front of a cruise car next.
Mhm.
You can look this up. I'm not going to go into the details, but it was a very unfortunate situation. Hindsight 2020, though, it probably should have happened, not should have happened. She just should have not gotten injured, but this incident was bound to happen eventually, right? Like, yes, autonomous vehicles are intended to make the road safer, but you cannot rule out every incident. Um, anyway, so that incident really resulted in a ripple effect of our CEO and co-founder resigning. There was executives getting laid off, and then they told us that we're going to have layoffs. So between the end of October and early December, people were in limbo. So everyone was just, sitting there trying to do some work, trying to like be hopeful. And honestly, I did not think, and we'll get into this, but I did not think I was going to get let off. I thought, oh, my contributions are so valuable. That I had some fears, but just talking to my managers and some of my like directors, I don't know, I thought it's going to be fine. But yeah, long story short, they had a mass reduce in force. So 25% of our company got let go. And it was also my first layoff, but very much a shock, even though we had like a month to sort of potentially prepare. But as humans, I don't know about you, but I was in denial. I was like, I'm going to focus on the projects that will help crews regardless in the future, regardless of my own fate. So I was heads down, still working on a lot of different programs based on no matter what's going to happen here, this is going to be important for the company. So I try to come at it from that angle, but definitely the layoff itself was a shock.
Remind me again when that accident happened, because you guys are a part of a bigger company, and was there like, I remember in the news, and I don't know if this is real or not, but there was like some access was revoked where like you guys couldn't operate in certain places, and I think that also led to like this reduction in force because you guys couldn't operate or expand in certain areas, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. So we decided to just halt operations in like certain cities, but then we decided to just cancel it all around. So, and I think that was the maturity of the parent company. So that, I think, just them coming in more and advising us on what to do, and advising our leaders what to do, which unraveled in like many, many months following. Cruise is still not operating to this date. We're recording this in like mid-year. But anyways, they are set to resume operations at the end of 2023. So this whole thing took like a year, or is going to take a whole year to really start. And in this whole time now, they were rebuilding and regaining trust. So again, I root for them. But yeah, so this entire halt of operations took like a year.
Yeah. And just to clarify, 2024, right? Not
Oh, sorry,
2023.
2024. Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, no matter what the scenario is, I mean, you and I have very different kind of situation that led to the layoff. But no matter what it is, I mean, it's difficult news to receive. Maybe you should go first. So when you received the news, it sounds like you weren't necessarily or you were hoping that it wouldn't impact you. Maybe you also got some sense of security from your manager or your leadership team. But when you did actually receive the news, what was your reaction? What type of like grieving process did you have to go through?
Yeah, for me, it was definitely like the 5 stages of grief, like back and forth. Like I definitely was in shock, and then I was in denial. I felt disappointed. And then later, I started to accept it and start to rebuild. But yeah, the most immediate one was definitely shock and denial. So I alternated between those two. And then the most prominent feeling following that was just disappointment that I couldn't help crews in this very important mission, which is to reduce the 42,000 deaths that we see every year on US roads driven by human error. It is to like, their mission just really resonated with me. Like, I love the fact that they're emission free, and I love that they're really trying to give mobility to the underserved communities that can't afford a car, things like that. So it was very much disappointment, and then also just disappointment that I couldn't work with my amazing group of colleagues. It was just like ripped away, abundance of just amazing people there, and people
Mm-hmm.
that poured their heart into this job, and people that were collaborative, and just great teammates. So it was really
Yeah.
sad. Yeah. What about you? Did you go through those stages of grief in any order, or?
Yes. I think I was probably in the shock, denial, and definitely disappointment in the first, like that first couple phases for a very long time. Like shock, obviously, right? Because I probably should have known, but I think I didn't have time to prepare. Part of that was definitely the being overpromised, something that wasn't necessarily actually given, but I think I was also probably overlooking red flag. Like maybe I was genuinely overlooking stuff because I was just excited to move into a completely different thing.
Mm,
Um,
mm, mhm, mhm.
so yeah, I don't know. Like I think I was in more of the denial and disappointment probably for the longest, and probably was like the strongest. But
Yeah.
for you, like did you feel like you had a loss of identity as well during this time? Or like I mentioned, I for me, it was a lot of self-pity. Like I went through a lot of that because I was so mad at myself and at the situation. But did
Yeah.
you have any of that experience?
Yeah, immediately following the layoff for sure. And honestly, this is where Shaliza's episode really came in. I actually listened to it right the day after. I remember I went for a walk, and I called her afterwards and said, "Thank you, by the way." I just listened to your episode. So the question of identity is just such a big one in general, right? And as I'm just on my journey, self-growth, etc., it always comes up in various ways, and like the role of your ego, right?
Mhm,
And how the ego is like the first one to make us feel like really small, because
mhm,
it also, I think, what when I talked earlier about I just didn't think I was going to get laid off, that was also my ego speaking, right? Because my ego said, no, they're not going to lay off someone like you. You're so special. You're so smart. You're so great. Like, you've gotten such amazing feedback. You've always been an overperformer. Like, why would they lay off
mhm,
someone like you? So they make you feel like this, like, such a special person, but then
mhm.
also the ego is the first one to make you feel really, really small. And so to go from that high to that low is really devastating, and sort of really puts you into a dark hole of, why me though? I thought it was so
Mhm.
special. Like, why, right? So, and then I actually thought immediately about, what is my family gonna think, and what is
Yep.
my network gonna think, right? Which is so stupid, but yes, that's of course where my head went. And so just the idea of having to put out there on LinkedIn, hey, even though you can frame it as, and I know it's not my fault, but in the moment of, you can frame it as it was a mass reduction and
Right.
things like that, it just felt a little bit just not humiliating, but yeah, a little bit humiliating. I think I was putting myself down and thought, wow, what are my former colleagues gonna think from LinkedIn, even, or from my other
Yeah.
companies? Like, yeah, a lot of that was going on, just like the
Yeah.
stigma of getting laid off.
But this is why I think this episode I hope resonates with people, or I hope when people listen back to it, when they do experience something like this, they know they can come to me or to you, because
Yeah.
at that time I literally knew zero people that I could talk to. Not having a community to support me during this time, but then also your own inner critic is going to be the harshest. And so
But yeah, Jane, why do you think like the stigma still like exists so much around job loss, and like how can we challenge that?
yeah, I think I do think it is changing. Like, I think now, because it is so common to see folks like reaching out to people on LinkedIn and sharing with their network, I'm hoping that it's changing. But I
Hmm.
think there's there's maybe two, like, I don't know. From my experience, I feel like one big reason is none of us are prepared, like in life or in school, to lose a job. Right?
Hmm.
Like you go to college, all you learn is resume building, which is for applying for a job, networking, which is getting a job, right? Like how do you
Yeah.
interview? These are all things of how to get a job.
Hmm.
Nobody ever teaches us and normalize that it's totally okay and normal to lose a job.
Mm.
We don't we
Preach.
don't actually think it's normal. That's why there's such a negative view.
Hmm.
And then I think that on top of that, I think what adds to the negative like stigma and the whole negativity around it is this generation now, I think, is very different. I think when we think about our parents' generation, like many of them literally work at the same company for like their entire life until retirement.
Yeah, like we can't fully account for why, right? But just the fact that our parents' generations haven't gotten laid off,
Hmm.
and just like this, I think there's just this general societal expectation around success, what success means. And there's like this linear definition of success. Like if
Hmm.
you're being constantly promoted and working your way up in this career path, you're
Hmm.
successful. And if that is disrupted, you're a failure. It's, I think that, so, and I
Yes.
love what you said around like people, we should put this into curriculums as well. Like, for like, I know in my MBA, I had like a career session once a week on how to find a job, but they should bake something into that around how to lose, what happens when you lose a job. Like that should be
Yeah.
at least mentioned, or having like maybe a third of that curriculum. So yeah, just this like very linear definition of success I
Yeah.
want to challenge too.
Yeah, it isn't that interesting? Like when you think about it, we literally never learn how to actually lose a job
Yeah.
and like and go through the mental health like struggles of that, right? Like of course it's challenging and very difficult, but so taking your ex employer as an example, um as you reflect, and especially now having gone like to the other side of this experience, what did you appreciate about like how this layoff was handled? Um, do you feel like there could have been things that maybe were handled a little bit better? And I think for me, I'm very curious. Do you feel like where our story is very different is mine was it just happened randomly in a
Mhm.
random day.
Yeah.
Yours, you had a whole leading up to it. Did you feel like maybe that was a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, because I think we're gonna share some very different examples here of companies how to handle that, and so that's hopefully gonna be helpful for our listeners, depending where you're at. But I think it was helpful for my company to prepare what's going to happen and to support the people that get laid off in the most supportive way, I guess. So for me, I really want to give kudos here to my former
Mhm.
employer. I think if there is sort of a North Star on how to do it, again, I don't have full comparison to other companies, but the severance was incredible.
Mhm.
So I think it starts there, right? Like in terms of money, there's so many people that had just bought a house. Like, I
Mm.
mean, you were one
Yeah.
example, right? But like for my former colleagues, a lot of them were in very different financial situations than I was. Like I was very flexible, I was just renting. And so, but the severance was very generous.
Mhm.
Health insurance, right? That goes hand in hand with that. So the number of months for health insurance, and then even beyond that, you could get like a discounted Cobra sort of
Mhm.
arrangement. So those were tables, I think table stakes, but I now heard from other people that what I got in severance is not the norm. So anyway, I just want to really kudos to that company. And then beyond that, I think some of the things that may be a little bit less obvious, but the fact that they still gave us access to Lyra, which is a therapy provider, for 3 months was very generous. And I cannot stress enough how much therapy helped me throughout this time. I'm an avid therapy visitor, as you
Mhm.
guys know. But even from I had some colleagues in software engineering who had never done therapy. And then when we got laid off, they were struggling really hard. Like
Mhm.
I thought I was struggling, but people that had never even like just sat with
Yeah.
doing nothing and had not having a purpose, it was really eye-opening. Like, wow, I really felt for them. So anyways, we got Dura and therapy. Then we got some like linked how to boost your LinkedIn profile and how to job search, how to network. So they offered those sessions, again, incredible. And then we had a Cruise alumni Slack channel. So
Mm.
it honestly was such a beacon of familiarity still, because I'm used to going on Slack every day, like just checking in with my teammate, what's going on. That's
Yeah.
like my main medium to stay in touch. And having a separate and just being cut off from the company Slack was Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's
Shocking.
crazy, shocking. And so the fact that we still had an alumni Slack, someone opened that amazing idea. So we were able to support each other, send each other job recommendations. Oh, this company's hiring. Just like also basic questions on how to tap into the health insurance, how to request XYZ.
During this time, like after it happened and you were in between jobs,
Uh-huh.
how did you go about staying hopeful? Or, right? Because obviously it's like kind of this like difficult time and like lull for a lot of people. A lot of people probably
Mhm.
experience a lot of self-doubt and can I get another job? Do I have the right skills? All that. Um,
Yeah.
how did you like maintain hope?
Yeah, I think this is my favorite, my favorite part to talk about, the silver lining, right, in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, interestingly enough, this this layoff really reminded me of the dating life too,
Mm-hmm.
in that dumping slash layoff, it's some sort of rejection, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, like I think rejection is honestly just like redirection. And I know this is easier said than done, but now coming out on the other side and looking back, I honestly can't thank the layoff enough because it
Mm-hmm.
got me to where I am here.
Mm-hmm.
And if our listeners are being honest with themselves, right, like a breakup or a dumping is really sad and really like it's maybe traumatizing sometimes in a moment, but then when
Mm-hmm.
you come out of it and you look back a year later, you're like, wow, I'm so glad we broke up because now I'm in this maybe more beautiful relationship, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it in the moment it may feel really personal, but it really has nothing to do with you, whether it's the dating or the breakup or the layoff. And I truly believe that it is nothing personal. And yeah, I think back to Jaleesa's episode, right? Like you're not defined by your career and your job is not your identity. So having
Mm-hmm.
that reminder of there's so much more to Sabrina, like, well, who is Sabrina outside of the job? So I asked myself the question many times and I invite our listeners to do the same. And this is an exercise you can always do like on the side. Like, who are you? Who is Jane outside of
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn or whatever it may be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great time for me to actually like restart, reset, and just like journal or like write down like who do I aspire to be? I think it's really when you're in the day-to-day job in the grind, it's so easy to be in the autopilot, right? And just like not take the time. But for me to just not have anything. It was very uncomfortable because I'm a
Yeah.
doer, I'm a performer, and I need some like things to do. But yeah, so I'm not saying this was easy, but I'm saying just sit with the uncomfortable, sit with the discomfort, let it cook you. I also like I listen to a lot of Esther Perel. She's an incredible relationship therapist, but I love the concept she talks about applied there. Like she's like saying, like the actively engaging with the unknown, that is like the crux of just like sitting with it, actively
Mm-hmm.
engaging with the unknown. And sometimes that can really lead to the most beautiful change and transformation. You can uncover maybe there's a new career path for you, maybe there's new skills you want to learn. And I understand that not everyone can take the luxury of having the time, but all of us can take some time out of just, all right, let's jump into the job search, or let's just do all of these things. Like, let's just also take some time per day to just
Mm-hmm.
do nothing, just be with your thoughts, and maybe allow yourself to go somewhere where you don't really go if you're just in this like autopilot.
Yeah. I think that's such like a mature way to look at it. I'm sure it's difficult to do it at that time, right? Like when you're going through it, it's hard to want to slow down because all you want to do is stay distracted or to like go take action and get that next job. But I think
Mhm.
it almost creates a sense of like just like it's not very mindful. Like you might just be applying for jobs for the sake of applying for a job because you need to have a job for that identity. So I think you're 100% right. Like as I'm getting older, I obviously I don't hope for this to happen to me, but I do think like that was the one thing that I don't think I did a really good job when I was laid off. Like part of it is this shock and denial, but like I also to your point, I'm also very much a I need to stay busy. I need to stay distracted so that I don't face this reality, right?
Yeah.
So like during that time, Oh my gosh, I like helped two of my friends like figure out their finances with their small businesses.
Oh,
Like they because
wow.
they're very good at what they do, like they're for whatever their small businesses are, but they're not like business people. And like if
Mm,
you're the owner of a small business, you need to get your finances in order. And both friends happen to be in like kind of similar situations where they just needed some help and
mm,
couldn't hire, a specialist. And so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get your finances in order. I'm gonna build these Excels for you so that like I'm gonna take my skills and do something good for you, like for free.
mm,
And
mm.
I stayed busy that way. I know a lot of people will also like volunteer and do things that they actually like want to do, but maybe don't have time to do.
Yeah.
Um, what I think I honestly I wish I had done more is I wish I traveled. I think part of it was fear of finances. Like I also got severance. Um, but me being an Enneagram 6, which we should really dedicate a whole thing on this.
Oh, yeah.
I have a lot of anxiety. Also being an immigrant, like we were never really financially stable. I'm very lucky to be very financially stable now, but I think in the back of my mind there's always this anxiety of like if I'm not working, how am I, feeding the family, doing all these things, right? There's all that pressure. And so I didn't really travel all that much. And I really should have because now I'm like in a stable job and I'm like, dang, I want to take 3 months off and travel the world, like I don't have to go to expensive places. Let me go to like affordable places and go live my life there. And,
Yeah.
you don't get to do that when you're an adult or if you're always in, a stable job. So that is my one big regret. And I should have done that a little bit more. But
What role did your support network play in this
yeah,
time?
I mean, it was like instrumental. I think I'm lucky to have had strong support, particularly from my family and my husband at the time we were dating, but we had moved in together.
Mm.
And so it was kind of odd to be starting our like living together relationship in a new home that I financially could not have afforded. So,
Yeah.
anyways, but yeah, they were like so important for me. I mean, Kyle being here in person, I think that was necessary. I really don't like being alone. I am afraid of being alone, and so having somebody here in person to support me literally day in day out was so important. Um, and then for me, like it really wasn't necessarily about finding a new job. Like I ultimately knew I had the right skills, so it wasn't that, but it was the emotional side of it of like feeling like a failure and needing the emotional support. And I think my parents like really, really helped me through that. They're like, if that house doesn't work, move home. Yeah, my like network really stepped it up for me. Everybody was referencing like job opportunities, sharing job opportunities, connecting me with hiring managers. And I have to give a huge shout out. I always say like I owe Kat my career at LinkedIn, Kat Morris, who's also one of our
Oh,
yeah, one of our podcast guests. But yeah, I reached out to a college friend who introduced me to her, and she was on the team that I wanted to be on. And then she introduced me to Christy, who turned out to be my manager. And it just like all worked out from there.
awesome story.
How about you?
Yeah, yeah, same. In terms of, I think what, because I talked about this shame earlier, right? Like how when I first got laid off, I didn't want to post on LinkedIn and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think what we all need to just get more used to is just asking for help. Like ask for help, make the post, and reach out to your network. People are so willing to help. I was absolutely speechless, the amount of affirmations, the amount of
Mhm.
introductions, unprompted recommendations written for me on LinkedIn. I I was just in shock, but in awe. Like it was so beautiful. And I want to pay that forward as well. So it as soon as I opened up to, hey, this is what happened to me, overwhelm of support. And I
Yep.
hope because I'm someone that doesn't really like to ask for help. And yeah, so for those of you that are in the same boat, just just share your story and people are going to jump on it and people are going to help you.
Out of this whole experience, what was like the positive side of it? And like what were some opportunities that kind of stemmed from this layoff for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so tying to some of the things I mentioned, but just getting more just like clarity, getting out of the autopilot, zooming out, and just having a lot of time to think and
Mhm.
to tap into like new areas that maybe domains you want to learn about. Like I learned about UX research, which is not an area I would have ever learned about had it not been for this layoff. And just really taking advantage of the time you have at your hands. I focus on passion project. I double down on the
Mhm.
podcast here. That's our baby. And I just had a lot more the luxury of time, right?
Mhm.
I called my grandmas more often, like things that you just completely neglect when you're in the zone, in the grind.
Yeah.
Reaching out to old colleagues, old friends more often, building those connections, and also spending more time with my family in Germany. Like those are things, again, there's only limited time you can spend with them. So, but being present and not having to, oh shit, I have my next phone call with work, just having
Mhm.
that extended quality time. There's so many beautiful things that come from a layoff. Sorry, not to glamorize a layoff now, but to be honest, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And Jane touched on this, but volunteering, I mean, you used your time really well in helping your friends. I love that. And so just trying to find purpose and trying to use your time for something good. I volunteered with
Mhm.
some Minnesota nonprofits. And I went on this life-changing Baja California wildlife conservation trip that I probably would have never gone on to, and really reconnected with nature. So I could go on, but those are some of my highlights.
No, I think you did the right thing though, because that's honestly, I mean, it's easier said than done, right? We're like now on the other side. So of course we're like, yeah, go travel, go do all these things.
Yeah.
And maybe not everybody has the circumstances or finances, but I genuinely do think like this is time that you normally wouldn't have. Like this downtime, to your point, like a lot of times we're in the day-to-day grind of like doing the job and
Mm,
getting the kids ready, doing your
right.
routine that you're not volunteering, you're not learning, you're not doing a lot of things. And I know it sounds so cheesy, probably, especially for somebody who might be going through this right now. It's probably hard to be like, oh, to learn, like I can't even get out of bed because I'm like
Mm,
depressed. And so I know it can be really, really tough. But there's really like if you want to be very logical about it, if you have an entire career, you could get really old and not have had a 3-month sabbatical. Like,
I just want to add, like, it's not like I didn't do anything, right? Like, so I was, yeah, make no mistake. I made a Word document with titled Sabrina Finding Her Dream Job. I made that document and I was very clear on, I want to set some smart, small goals, like I want to talk to 3 people per week, 3 new people. I
Mhm,
want to take XYZ LinkedIn learning courses, finish my resume. Like there was like smaller goals baked into that. So each week I had like goals, but
mhm.
around that, I allowed myself to tap into these new things. So
So Sabrina, now that we are kind of on the other side of it and we can be logical about it, maybe a little bit emotional, maybe a little emotional, but
yeah.
um how has your like way of viewing career success changed since the layoff? Because earlier you mentioned like part of the stigma is this idea of like your career success is this linear, you need to grow, you need to be promoted, right? That's what people see as very positive. But then layoff obviously is a detractor in that experience. So what's your new perspective on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's like something that has been accompanying me for my whole life, right? Like in order to be successful, you have to be promoted and or you have to have the best grades, or you have to be, right, like getting A's in school and things like that. But
Mhm,
layoffs and just some other additional self-work like really changed my definition of success. So I look at life as like a pie chart. So if you picture life in a pie chart and you have these different slices, there's one slice around career, there's one about health, whether that's mental or physical, and then there's one around relationships,
mhm,
friends, family, romantic relationships. And a pie chart, that's 100%, right? And it's a zero-sum game at the end of the day. If one pie slice shrinks, you can spend more attention to others. And it is a zero-sum game where I have less time, more time now because I got laid off, right? So the career slice shrinks. So I have more time to spend on exercising, which I did. I doubled down on exercising. I went to therapy even more. I double down on, like I said, talking to my grandmas, reaching out to friends and coworkers. So those slices will get more attention. And honestly, if I look at life in general, like I want to be successful in all aspects of life, like not just in this career piece, which is a small one, but really look at it holistically and like how fulfilled are you in these different areas. So to me, I think everyone can take the time and just look at that, like what does it look like for them, and like act accordingly. But yeah, so for me now, that almost took like the pressure off myself a little bit. Like I still have goals and I still want to do well in my career, but I'm not solely defined by that pie chart, or by that slice, if that makes sense.
I think for me, honestly, I'm working on changing my view of career success quite a bit. Part of it is because of the layoff, but part of it is just like I'm just getting older and like being more mature and more experienced in my career. But a big thing that I'm now working on is being comfortable being in whatever role. Because I think I have always pursued the way we've just defined it, right? Which is like, what is the next job? What is the next promotion? How do I get there? And what is that going to mean for me? Who do I need to network, and what do I need to show in front of them to then be quote unquote qualified for that next job?
Yep.
And I feel like that's great. Like that got me to where I am today. I have grown very quickly within different companies. But now I'm at a place where I'm like, I'm very happy and fulfilled in the work that I am doing. And I don't actually care to be like actively seeking this next thing and to take on all these different risks. And I think I'm also part of this could also be contributed by the fact that I'm like at a different phase in my life where I want to spend more time with family. I want to one day start my own family. And like that now is way more important to me than just purely quote unquote career success. That is, to your point, only one part of the pie. And as I shift into different phases of my life, certain parts of the pie will be more important than another. So I need to like actively shrink a certain component to then expand on the other ones, right? So I think I'm working on accepting that like there's different definitions of career success, and currently my joy and happiness in my day job and being able to like contribute to this bigger vision that I really care about, working on projects that are really fulfilling, where I can see tangible success, where I'm getting recognized for my work. And the recognition doesn't have to come from a promotion, right? It's not that traditional view of success. And so I think just stuff like that, I'm starting to shift my perspective on.
So, Jane, for those of our listeners who are sitting here like, okay, well, I've never gotten laid off, and God knows I feel really secure in my job. But again, like I don't think is there such a thing as career security at this point? And how can people better prepare for just like the possibility of a loss? And again,
Yeah.
we're not trying to wish this on anyone, but it actually
Yeah.
like it all worked out in the end. So how can people better prepare?
Yeah. I don't believe in job security anymore. I
Same.
have opened my eyes. But I mean, it's right, it's kind of the truth. I mean, we literally kind of opened the conversation with the idea that maybe in previous generations there genuinely is security. There's also certain roles where there are maybe like pension and like unions, right? That creates more security maybe for some people. I have not experienced that, only because I've not been a part of those types of jobs.
Yeah.
But I think if you're in kind of a normal corporate America 9 to 5, especially if you work in tech or
Yeah.
startup or right, any of that, like just go in knowing that you're not going to have security.
Yeah.
I will say, for people that have never gotten laid off, one thing that I have really come to terms with, and it's sad, but like our companies they care about us, but they don't really care about us.
Mm,
Okay. Like, let's all just put it out there
yep.
and let's be real, because all of us, as important as we are and as critical as the work that we may be doing and delivering, there's probably somebody else who can do that work,
Right.
right? Like, none of us are doing life-saving work. And frankly, even if you're a doctor and you're doing life-saving work, there's also somebody else who can do that surgery, right? Like, we're all,
Yeah.
in a way, replaceable. And so, if I'm being fully honest, that is like the one thing that I have come to terms with. And it's not to talk down at anybody. Like, we are all so valuable and we bring the skills that we bring to these jobs. And we're hired by these companies because they see value in us. But at the same time, I think maybe it's setting aside ego. Maybe it's just recognizing that, like, at least in the United States, it's very like shareholders driven. And so,
Yeah.
accepting the reality, I think will help um prepare people.
Employers, they don't owe us anything, right? And we shouldn't therefore owe them anything.
Right.
I like just now that I've gotten laid off, it's just like my like mantras, always be networking. Just
Mm-hmm.
if you get a invite on LinkedIn for an interview, do it. Take the interview. Why not? Stretch that muscle, flex that muscle, practice that. You never know. And I think, yeah, like setting, even if you want to meet with someone else from a different company like once a month, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's such an important skill. And we forget that, right? When we're, again, such in the grind.
For our listeners, if anybody were to be laid off, let's say tomorrow, knock on wood, we don't hope for that.
Yeah.
But if anybody were to be laid off tomorrow, what is your last parting wisdom for them?
Yep. Yeah, just to re-emphasize that the job loss is not a personal failure. It has nothing to do with you. In 99.9% of cases, this was a decision that the company made. And they, at the end of the day, oftentimes treat us as numbers, right? And so especially in the tech industry, the layoffs are the new norm. So don't take it personally. And yeah, like I mentioned, employers, they don't owe you anything, so act accordingly. Still keep your feelers out, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And this is not to sound cynical, this is just being like realistic. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but also take the time to mourn, take the time to grieve,
Mm-hmm.
and then take like small baby steps to, as we talked about in this entire podcast, like set smart goals, but also just sit with the unknown and just let it cook you.
For me, listen, everybody moves forward. You will move forward as well. Time is gonna heal it. Like, it just sometimes, like, it's grief, right? It is grief at the end of the day. It's shocking you're going through this, different phases of grief. And so that's totally normal. Um, I know I was very depressed at the time, and that is totally normal for people. I do think, like, try your best to stay as positive as you can. Like, sometimes there is a silver lining, right? For you, it nudged you and pushed you into kind of this new phase being in San Francisco. Maybe you wouldn't have taken that leap if it didn't happen. And for me, I left a really toxic place. Maybe not on my own will, but it was honestly for the best. Like, literally, when I called my mom crying with my umbrella in the rain, my mom, the first thing she said was, I think this was a good thing. Like, you were not happy there
Oh,
anyways. So, like, I think people around you will support you. People around you see what's going on. I also want to, this is something I work on with my therapist, but she said, anchor on facts. So I definitely should have done a little bit more of that, but remind yourself, like, there's going to be a lot of emotions, right? Of like, oh, I'm not smart enough. I'm not a good fit. I don't have the skill, but like, anchor yourself down on fact. What exactly are you bringing to the table? What type of skills do you have? What projects have you actually done? And like, to Sabrina's point, work on your resume, like, have these small goals, but like, work on it. And like, as you're working on it, remind yourself of what you're bringing to the table. Cause I genuinely do think, like, employers or like interviewers, I think they can feel the negativity, or like, if you're down on yourself, I think they can feel it. So like, pretend if you have to, anchor on your fact, build a strong resume, and then you'll move forward. So
That's such tangible advice. I really like that. Yeah. The facts versus the thoughts, right? Because the thoughts can
yeah.
derail us.
Because I do think, like, I know for a fact I had interviews where I was like so down on myself. I was,
Mm.
apologetic about what I'm bringing and not feeling very confident about my skill. Like, I now feel very confident because I'm in a healthy job and a good, like, supportive environment. But yeah, at the time, I know it's very, very hard to believe in yourself and to um, feel that positivity.
But yeah, you and I are literally, if this is giving our listeners hope, like the exemplification of how we come out on the other side. Like you are in a
Yeah.
job now that you're just killing it. You're, you have so many responsibilities, you're juggling. You just won a massive award that it's like the award at that company, right? To showcase, to just illustrate your contributions. And then for me, yeah, like moving to San Francisco, being at a company that I enjoy, that I love, like I building what I love to do at a bigger scale. I just could have never dreamed of that like 6 months ago. And here we are. So it is just really, it will all work out. I know it sounds so annoying when you're in the moment, but just don't rush the process also. Just
Yeah.
have faith that you will come out on the other side, but don't rush the process.
Yeah. Well, with that said, we would love to hear from our audience. I'm curious, how many people have actually been laid off and like when and what scenario? So like tell us your story. We actually want to hear your story. How did you go through? Well, tell us the actual layoff because we want to know the tea. But we also want to know like how did you get through the process? Like what was the silver lining for you? Maybe there isn't, and that's okay. We would love to hear from you and how you bounce back. So if you want to email us at whereisthelinepod@gmail.com. And as always, remember to subscribe wherever you're listening. We are on Apple, Spotify, and now YouTube. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Bye.